My name is Hannah. I'm one of the assistant directors of admissions at HWS. I'm going to be in the chat monitoring, fielding questions, anything admissions related, campus life in general, but then also any questions specifically targeted to this program to let Professor Spector know. So at this time, I'll turn my camera and mic off and turn it over to Professor Spector. Thank you.
And yes, well, so welcome all of you here. Feel free, cameras on, cameras off, whatever you're comfortable with. I gather you're here because I hope you're in the right place. This is our admission session focused particularly on the joint engineering programs that we have at Hobart and William Smith colleges. My plan here is to talk for, I don't know, 15 minutes-ish or so. I haven't really timed this out. Just give you an overview of how the whole engineering thing works, and then turn it over to whatever questions you all might have. As Hannah said, if you have questions during the line, you can, just pop up with the questions. You can put questions in the chat. Hannah will be monitoring the chat, so if I don't see something, she'll let me know. So I'll take a moment just to tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit about HWS and some of the things about the sciences in general, and then talk about engineering in particular. So I've been at Hobart and William Smith colleges for just over 30 years now, which is a long time. And I've been the coordinator, liaison, whatever the official term is, for our engineering program for about 2/3 of that time, a little more. I'm a member of the physics department. Many of you who are interested in engineering would also probably be interested in physics. I've got a wonderful set of colleagues. I'll just say a word about them right now because as prospective engineering students, you'd be interacting with them a lot. There's my colleague, Ilana Dumitriou, who both has done work in heavy ion physics out at the Advanced Light Source in Berkeley, but now is also focused on using remote sensing, using drones to do spectroscopic work to study the properties of Seneca Lake and other nearby lakes for environmental features. And a lot of I mention this because a lot of our students in engineering or the sciences wind up doing research projects involving these groups. We've had a number of the engineering students have done research with Professor Dumitriou. My colleague, Professor Hebb, is an astronomer and astrophysicist. She does things like discover planets around stars other than the sun. We have an observatory on campus, which is used for actual observations, and she also has connections to places like the Space Science Telescope Institute. My colleague Ted Allen, like me, is a theoretical physicist. We look at sort of foundational questions in physics. And then my colleague Steve Penn works for the LIGO, which is the Laser Interferometric Gravitational Observatory. They are the people who have discovered black hole mergers and neutron star mergers and things like that. And we've had, in fact, the neutron star merger paper, well, one of our students was on that paper with Steve. So we have lots of stuff going on within the physics department. And it's a similar story in the allied science departments, chemistry and math and biology and so forth. But what we are here to talk about today specifically is the engineering program. Although obviously, if you've got questions towards the end about sciences more generally, I'm perfectly happy to answer those. So Hobart and William Smith colleges, as you know, is a liberal arts college. And one of the things that means is we do not have an engineering school, but we have students who are certainly interested in engineering. And so we have relationships with Dartmouth and Columbia. And with those relationships, we have programs in place where students will spend a total of 5 years, 3 years at HWS, 2 years at the partner institution, at the end of which they'll have 2 degrees. A degree from HWS in whatever you major in here. Typically, it's physics. It's not 100% of the students who do physics, but that's often the case. And then a Bachelor of Engineering degree from the partner institution, Dartmouth or Columbia, respectively. And the idea is that if you were at an engineering school, you would start out taking some science and engineering basic classes side by side and then sort of specialize. Whereas what happens here is that HWS takes care of the science education, the engineering school takes care of the engineering education, but you go beyond in the sciences because you wind up with a full major in physics, or in some cases, it's been chemistry or math. And so not just the basic science, but actually you wind up with a major in the science here and that full engineering degree. The logistics of the program are are probably worth getting into, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about the philosophy of the program, about why one might choose to do this. So I know that from talking to students along the way, as they come into HWS, you're coming out of high school, and a lot of times students have an interest in the sciences, in STEM fields. They want to do something technical, and they're not really sure what. And engineering is something they know about, and so they think they might want to do engineering, but they're not sure. And so through this program, you don't come in as a declared and locked into the engineering thing, just like you don't come in locked into majoring in history. You come in with this as an option. And then you have some time in your first year or two to be taking these classes, start figuring out, well, what is the direction I want to go? And some of our students come in and they're thinking engineering, and it's just like they just make a beeline. They just boom, 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 follow the path. They wind up, they do engineering, and all is great. Or all is as expected. Other students come in really not sure. Some wind up figuring out they want to do engineering. Some wind up figuring out they want to do something else. That's great. We have some students who decide that they're going to come in and they'll spend 4 years here and then go on and do a master's in engineering. And again, that can work well. And one of the things we pride ourselves on is that we try to make sure that each of you gets the individual advising that you need to make the right decisions for you. Some of that will hinge on where your interests are. Some of it will be, for instance, if you're interested in civil or mechanical engineering, the 3-2 program makes a lot of sense. If you're interested in biomedical engineering, 3-2 engineering can make sense. A student, Julia Bellamy, who's now pursuing a doctorate in biomedical engineering, made sense for her. Similarly, Magdi God, one did it with Dartmouth, one with Columbia, but then other students realize, you know what? I'm going to stay at HWS. Maybe I'll do a double major, and then I'll go and do a master's in engineering. So we help you figure that out. And so that's one of the pluses to start with, is that you're not locked into a path. You have a chance to figure out what's the thing you want to do. For those who pursue the 3-2 program, among the important advantages that come out of it is that you wind up with 2 twin experiences. You've been at a small liberal arts college with all the critical thinking and analytical skills that involves, and you've been at an Ivy League engineering school with all the resources that involves. You've been on you've got 2 majors, right? The science one and the engineering one. You've shown that you can acclimate to 2 different campuses, and you gain that experience. And I know from talking to my colleagues at engineering schools, when they see the recruiters come in and looking for candidates, they always find it very attractive that the 3-2 students are coming in not with one kind of experience, but with this dual experience. The logistics of the program vary a little bit between Dartmouth and Columbia. With Columbia, you'll spend 3 years at HWS, 2 years at Columbia. There's a set of prerequisite courses Columbia will expect. There's like a core set, and then there'll be some specifics saying, oh, and if you want to do environmental engineering, make sure to take this. If you want to do electrical engineering, make sure to take that in addition to the core. So as a practical matter, those core pieces are the ones you certainly would start taking your first semester. But we make sure that you're thinking with an eye like, okay, you're taking these things now so that you will get to the right spots. With Dartmouth, it's a little more complicated, is too strong a word, but you'll spend 2 years at HWS. 3rd year, you go to Dartmouth. 4th year, you come back to HWS, and then 5th year, it's back to Dartmouth. And we go through cycles where Columbia seems more popular, cycles where Dartmouth seems more popular. I think it really just depends on the students. For some people, it's a question of location. For some people, it's a question of schedule. Some like the 3-2, some like the 2-1-1-1, whatever. But one thing you'll notice in there is that there are a bunch of prerequisite courses that you've got to make sure to take to fit everything in. So How do you do that? Well, you do that, it's through, like everything else at HWS, that direct personal advising. So we make sure that if you're interested in engineering, you should, at the very least in your first semester, be taking physics and calculus. Uh, if you've got some AP credits, we figure out what the right place to go is. But the idea is that we make sure that you are on track so that if you do want to do engineering, you'll be able to do so. You're not locked into it at the beginning, but if you put off taking the prerequisite courses, you could be locked out just from from the calendar. So you want to make sure that doesn't happen. Um, and then, it works out because the students who do that, who come in, there are a couple dozen of you here right now, and typically we'll have anywhere from 1 to 2 dozen students come in thinking that they're interested in engineering. How many actually apply? That'll really vary. It's probably in the range of 2 to 4 in a given class who apply. But one thing to understand is that the ones who don't apply, it's not because, oh my God, calculus is too hard and they failed out or something like that. It's that they've been taking their STEM courses, they like them, but they realize what they want to do is better served by staying at HWS. Or it might be in the case, I remember Laura Mondaccio and Tyler Hanslick from the start, like their idea was they wanted to spend 4 years at HWS and then go off and do masters, which they did. One in Wisconsin, one, I think Lauren went to Colorado. I think that's where it was. So some of those students who come in wanting to do engineering eventually take a different path, but they're all success stories because it's generally that they're getting the advising and they're figuring out where you want to be for what you want to do. Let's see. I just want to make sure to hit a couple of the other key points. Questions that may or may not come up, it sort of depends how far you've, been diving into HWS and how our curriculum works. But one thing you know about Hobart and William Smith colleges is that we ask every student to complete a major and a minor, or they can do 2 majors. If you're doing engineering, that counts as your second thing. You don't have to do a major and a minor and engineering. You do the major and you do the engineering. So at HWS, you're completing your major, you're completing those engineering prerequisites, which have the largest overlap with the physics major, which is one reason that the students will tend to major in physics, and you complete our distribution requirements, which we call the goals. And so, and then also in the 3 years you spend at HWS, you fulfill those requirements, but you only need to take 3 years worth of classes, right? It's not like you're overloading up on the classes because then the classes from the partner institution count back. So I think let's see, some of the, and so then also, how does it work logistically for getting in? So you come to HWS and engineering is available to you in the same way that majoring in math is available to you, in the same way that majoring in history is available to you, whatever. But you need to be on the track from the start in order to make sure you fit everything in. And it's not that you can't take anything but STEM classes. And in fact, both Dartmouth and Columbia expect that you're going to take other things, but there are certain ones you have to take so that you get to the milestones on time. Now for Dartmouth, you typically send in your application to Dartmouth middle of the sophomore year, and for Columbia, it's middle of the junior year. And then at that point, you will hear back from them in the spring. And then decide to go or not go in the fall. We've had students apply, get in, and decide not to go. We've had students come think they're going to do engineering and decide not to apply. We've had students come in not thinking they were going to do engineering and then apply and go. So I've seen every possible permutation. There's not a guarantee that Columbia or Dartmouth that you'll get in, but our track record is extremely strong. We just did a count recently for the past decade or so, maybe 11 years. I forget the exact number of years. It was 11 or 12 years. During that time period, we've had 30 students want to pursue engineering. Of those 30, 28 have gotten in to Dartmouth or Columbia. Of the other two, one was waitlisted at Dartmouth, but by that time had decided that she didn't want to do this. And so she pulled her name out. In fact, she's now working doing intellectual property work at MIT. Like, she figured out the other path she wanted to do. Did a double major in physics and econ, and like just had this whole other thing going on. And then there was that one person who didn't get in, who I would say he wasn't actually surprised, given his grades were sort of heavy, but then he went and did a master's in engineering. I forget where, it was in New Jersey, I remember, right after he graduated. What I usually tell people is, guideline as to what's expected is a little different for each school, but they evaluate each student individually. So there's not like there's a GPA cutoff. I'll typically tell a student, if your GPA is a 3.8, you're probably in great shape. At a 3.5, you're definitely competitive. At a 3.2, you probably don't want to count on it. I would say that's probably the guidelines for Dartmouth. Columbia says their recommendation is that in your pre-engineering courses, you're applying with a 3.3 average and at least a B in each of the engineering prerequisite classes that you're going in applying with. So it gives you a sense of what the expectations are. But I would say our track record is certainly extremely strong. And I think that, we make sure that you are prepared. Our students who go routinely say that they felt fully well prepared. And Dartmouth and Columbia keep taking our students, they like the education that you get at HWS, which I think is a really nice confirmation of, what we're doing at HWS, but also that the program works, right? That we have that. So I think those are the highlights of how things go. And rather than me talking longer, I'd rather answer any questions I can talk forever. I'm a professor. That's what we do. But I would be happy to answer questions you might have. So I will turn that over. There's a question in the chat, which I think was sent to me. Okay, so somebody who knows someone who's on the program. Yes, well, I should say also, what do our students do after they do engineering? Many of them go off and work in the kinds of things you might expect. A number of years ago, Matt Johannesson wound up working on the new construction at the site of the World Trade Center, and he's been involved with that. Scott Thompson has been all around the world with various construction projects as a mechanical engineer. Some students have gone off to work in finance. Justin Partika did the engineering program and then went off, and he's been working in finance since he graduated for the past, it's about 7 years now. And then some students have gone off to do, number of students who went to Dartmouth State, did a master's there. Jane Monaco is now doing a PhD in aerospace engineering at Boulder. Julie Bellamy is doing a PhD in biomedical engineering at Cornell. Misty Chan is, I guess, in the process of deciding where to go for grad school. She's hearing back from grad schools now. And she's actually probably going to go in astronomy/astrophysics. So people go in multiple directions, but again, lots of success. Question here that says at the acceptance rate, which I've talked about, and the stats, I've given you some idea there. And I would say that was a question of have I noticed a difference in selectivity for the different kinds of subfields of engineering? And I would say no. I think the schools want to know what subfield of engineering you're interested in. With Columbia, you apply specifically in electrical engineering or in environmental engineering. Dartmouth, you apply with an interest, but Dartmouth view is that you will wind up with a degree in engineering with a specialty, but they kind of have sort of what they put sort of a liberal arts view of engineering. But in my experience, the likelihood of getting in does not hinge on which particular subfield you've identified. It's more, what's your academic record look like? And do is what you've done indicative of someone who is interested in pursuing career in engineering? They don't just look at the grades, right? If you have great grades, but sort of a mediocre, an essay that really doesn't say anything and there's no indication that this is what you want to do, they would rather pick someone who is really committed. Now, we have an engineering club on campus. It involves both students who are pursuing engineering through the 3-2 program and others who are just interested. So that's a nice thing to mention. Question, is the degree, it's 2 additional years at Dartmouth or Columbia. It's just in Columbia, it's 3 followed by 2 or 2, 1, 1, 1. The degree that you get at the end is 2 bachelor's degrees. What you should know is that in engineering, the professional degree that you need is what's called an ABET certified bachelor's degree. ABET is the accrediting body, and that's what you get from the schools. And again, depends on what field you're going into. If you're going to be like the person who is hired by the government to certify that buildings are safe, you need that ABET certified mechanical engineering degree. If you're interested in biomedical engineering, that's hugely interdisciplinary. And so some students will do that through engineering. Some will get to biomedical engineering through other routes. But anyway, it's a total of 5 years, 3 at HWS, 2 at the partner school, 2 bachelor's degrees at the end. Question about the general engineering courses. So the core prerequisites that you need to take for Dartmouth or Columbia, it's 2 semesters of physics with lab, first semester of chemistry, 2 semesters of calculus, plus a course called Math Methods, which is taught in the physics department, but it's really an applied math course, and intro to computer science. And then you would never want to go with just that. So Dartmouth does not require more than that, but because you're completing a major at HWS, say in physics, most likely you've taken electronics and modern physics. I encourage most of the students to take electronics, in fact. For Columbia, it's that same core, but then they'll also say, if you're interested, let's say in electrical engineering, they'll say, and make sure to take electronics. And for a number of the things, they'll expect differential equations. On top of that, Columbia also always requires that you take intro to econ. And then they make it explicit that they expect that you've taken non-technical courses as well. Of course, Dartmouth also expects that. What's a little different is that at Dartmouth, you can actually take some of your non-technical courses while you're at Dartmouth. They don't expect you to be doing only engineering classes. That's that. Those are the questions I see in the chat right now. Other questions that people might have. Oh, somebody says one last question, I promise. Oh, it doesn't matter how many questions you have. That's why we're here. I don't know of anyone who's done operations research at Columbia in particular. I'd have to think because I've been doing this for a long time. So I don't know that specifically. What I can tell you is that our students who have gone to Columbia and to Dartmouth, I think to a person, have all been happy with the paths that they chose, which is pretty good. I remember asking many years ago, Mark Lamont, he's one of the few who was a math major and went off. But I can't remember what area of engineering he did. I asked him if he felt prepared, and he said, oh, if anything, he felt over-prepared, which I took was a really nice testament. But I don't know that I can think of someone specifically who did OR, operations research, at Columbia. One thing I'll mention, because we've got there's a bunch of you here. Some of you may sometimes hear about people who are software engineers. Software engineers have no reason to do engineering at an engineering school. And I say this not just from my professional knowledge, but my son is a software engineer. He did not do an engineering degree. For historical reasons, people who work in software are called software engineers or compiler engineers or things like that. And I usually would advise students interested in on the software side are probably going to be better served with 4 years at HWS and really mining the computer science and the math departments. If you're interested in the hardware side, that's a different story. Then engineering is a great option. But again, that's the kind of like one-on-one advice that we make sure to give you. What kind of field study work does HWS help students line up during school or during summer breaks for experiences and areas of interest? So I've already mentioned some of the research that my colleagues do, and I think we've had do HWS students get to participate in research? Yes, they do. And it might be in physics, as I've mentioned, some of my colleagues, right? Misty Chen, and you can do research. There's summer research. There's just research projects during the term. Then some students do an honors thesis. So Misty Chen did an honors thesis studying, you may have heard of sunspots, which are little dark spots that are on the sun, which are a little bit cooler than the rest of the sun. She did an honors project that was not engineering like at all, but she was studying the equivalent of sunspots on distant stars using data from it's called the Kepler Observatory, a satellite observatory. We've had a couple of students do engineering related honors projects. I can think of Scott Calnan did, Jasper White did. One of them, for instance, did designing something that harvested energy from sort of the motion of a buoy in the water as it bobbed around. There's our engineering club, which generally works both on skill development and projects of various kinds. I think right now they're just doing something building a little sort of video of an engine they're building. We have classes like our electronics class, but then research. So there's often summer research on campus. We also encourage students, and many of our students do, apply for research experiences elsewhere. So there's a national network of research experiences for undergraduates, REUs, sponsored by the National Science Foundation. So some of our students have done that. They've done REUs. Lauren did one in optics up in Rochester. We had a couple spend summers out in Montana doing sort of remote sensing kind of work. There's even during the pandemic, I think people landed things. We've also had students like my student Walden Marshall, who I think someone in the chat knows. Walden was involved in research on campus that was supervised by 2 professors. They were making sort of network models of how brain activity might work. And he was working with Dan Graham, who's a neuroscience professor, and Jan Howe, who's an applied math professor. So absolutely, there are research experiences available to us. And we've also had students who find things, I've had summer jobs. Marcus Lenz, who's at Columbia now, had a hardware-based job at a company, but I guess he had found that one himself. Justin Partika, the one who wound up in finance, that happened because he found an internship with a banking company. And that was one of his interests, right? He wanted to do engineering, but he wanted to move in that other direction. And our career services office is great for that kind of thing as well. I know also things like my colleague, Professor Demetriou in electronics, it's a fall semester class with sophomores. She often has as one of the class projects, gets them to apply for summer programs. Right now, I know I've got a couple students waiting to hear, one of them for a photonics program at BU, Boston University. And we like when students have a chance to do research on campus, but also elsewhere, right? They get to meet other students, see other places. It's sort of like, we want you to be part of the larger scientific and engineering community. And during the pandemic, I remember Jane Monaco, there wasn't anything going on, designed her own project of doing some radio sensing, but Jane was particularly adept at that kind of thing. Other questions?
We have a question about how does tuition and scholarships work and how they're offered between the 2 programs?
Right. So that's something which is strictly speaking outside my expertise, so I can tell you my understanding, but you should clarify anything about that with financial aid, partly because like there are just different zones on campus, and partly because like financial aid rules are always changing. And I also know this year financial aid is the whole FAFSA mess, like so, which is separate from the rules, but I'm just my sympathies. I am fortunate that my kids are past college age and I'm not having to deal with that. And that's certainly a stress no one needed. So with Columbia, it's pretty straightforward. 3 years here, you're under HWS's aegis, and then the 2 years at Columbia, you're under Columbia. And that's one important thing, by the way, is that if when you get admitted to, let's say you apply to Columbia your junior year, you get admitted and the financial aid package just doesn't make sense for you at that time, you don't have to go. You can stay with us for the 4th year. We will, and then you'll still continue to be covered by us and so forth, right? You're never locked in until you actually go. With Dartmouth, I believe the practice has been that the 5th year, you're under Dartmouth's financial aid. Obviously, the 3 years, first year, sophomore year, and senior year, you're under HWS. And then the junior year is the weird one. And the approach has been, and I believe it is still the case, that we treat that similar to a student who's doing a semester abroad, except it's not abroad, it's at Dartmouth, and it's not a semester, it's a year. And so you stay under the HWS financial aid regimen, although the tuition actually winds up going to Dartmouth. And so that's the one wrinkle, and that's one reason that yeah. So that's as I said, there was a thing, double check everything with financial aid folks, but that is my understanding of how things work. So 2 questions which are actually sort of related. One wants to know, is there still a chance to explore and in the first year, and is there a writing requirement? So Columbia has an explicit writing requirement that you take writing, but that is met through our first-year seminar, and every student at HWS takes a first-year seminar. So yes, there's a writing requirement for Columbia, but it's automatically met. Dartmouth does not have a specific one. In terms of, it's a really great question, right? I'm saying on the one hand, you need to make sure you're on track. On the other hand, part of the point is you want to have a chance to explore and figure out what's for you. And the answer is yes, there is space. You have to be intentional about it. So typically, well, you're taking 4 classes a semester. So your first semester, you're going to be in a first-year seminar. And then in general, you'd be taking Calc 1 and Physics 1. And then your 4th course can be whatever you want. And then in the spring semester, again, you've got that freedom. You'd have 1 or 2 classes that can be whatever you want. And I think there are 2 things that are happening with that. One of them is that you're taking those other classes and seeing how they feel. You're also seeing how the math and the physics feel. Like, is this where you want to spend your time? I know for me, when I went to college, I was sort of torn between physics and political science. And I took courses my first year. I took the math and physics course each semester. I also took something political science related. And what I realized was I liked both, but what I really liked spending my time doing was the science, the physics and math stuff. And so, yes, there is time. And the key thing is, again, getting good advising. Because we'll sit down with you and look, all right, specifically, what are you coming in with? What are you thinking about? How can we work out the different scenarios? And it might be, for instance, for someone who needs to explore, that because Dartmouth you apply in the middle of your sophomore year, that might be a little tougher. And it might be easier to be thinking about Columbia because there's just a little bit more wiggle room to like, well, you know what, I can put that off for a semester kind of thing. But just judging from the fact that that students have coming in and, as I said, 1 to 2 dozen interested in engineering, but maybe 2 to 4 applying. Those other ones figured it out somehow. Most of them stayed in STEM, but some wind up doing. Are there any who completely? Yeah, there was Joey Stewart who decided he wanted to do intellectual property law, just went a whole different direction. Some students decide they want to stay, but they want to do a double major, 1 STEM, non-STEM. So yeah, if you're completely undecided, I think then in that case, you might start down this path, but you might say, you know what? I'll wait. And then if I really want to do engineering, I can do that as a master's. I even know one student who realized he wanted to do engineering after he graduated. He was working in the area, so he took a couple of classes to prep and then went off and did engineering. So one of the things is that there are multiple paths, and we will make sure that you are prepared. Uh, Somebody posts says, as an engineer, I really think that engineering degrees should be 5 years by default. So it's interesting you should say that, because engineering students at Dartmouth, it is very typical for the engineering students at Dartmouth who just go through Dartmouth are there for more than 4 years. Typically around, I think it's around 4.5 on average. How big are the class sizes? And what kind of support there is. So, one of the things about HWS is that you don't have big classes. So, a large intro class would be 30 people. And that, I would say, intro physics 1 sometimes has been, I think that would be a typical size, might also be 20. Physics 2 is generally a little smaller than physics 1. We have 2 sections of physics 1 in the fall in order to keep that class size a little bit smaller. So, and then when you get to classes like math methods, a sophomore level class, it's often around 15 people. Is I think a typical size. It's been smaller. It's never been much larger than that. I think maybe it's been up to about 18. Sometimes it's down to 9 or 10. So we're going to know you. If you want to be anonymous, do not come to Hobart and William Smith colleges. You will not be anonymous. In terms of support, we have lots of kinds of support. First of all, we're professors at a liberal arts college because we want to know you. We want to talk to you. I have office hours, but just on Monday, there's a student, students can't always make your office hours. We get that. Monday evening, I was Zooming with a student because that was the time that we could meet. We have a program called Teaching Fellows where students, and in a lot of departments, there are physics teaching fellows, there are math teaching fellows, there are inorganic and organic chemistry teaching fellows. And those are students, upper level students, who are available on a drop-in basis, typically 4 nights a week, like 7 to 10. And some people just go to the teaching fellows just as a place to work and maybe be around other people. If they have questions, they ask. And those are people who are available to give assistance. And then one of the other nice things is because we don't have a separate physics class for pre-meds and physics class for this group and physics class for that group. I mean, we have special classes for those not interested in the sciences. But so when I'm teaching, I often teach the intro, I often teach intro physics too. And I will have in that class biology, chemistry, physics, math, engineering, everybody's there. And so that creates a nice interaction amongst the students from the different sciences. And so physics 2, there might be a junior biology major who's a pre-med taking it, and there might be a first-year student. And having that synergy of the first-year students being around the upper-level students in the sciences, it's just wonderful to watch what happens there in those conversations. For students who choose to do physics for 4 years, how many wind up going to engineering programs or going on to grad school? Basically, what do they do? It's a mixed bag. I don't have percentages for you. I would say probably it's like anywhere. I'm trying to think if I can even round up rough numbers. Probably the majority go on, at least initially, to jobs that use their technical background. My guess would be it's roughly equal numbers who wind up doing some kind of engineering degree right afterwards versus, and probably a little more do that. And then there are a few who'll do advanced degrees in physics. So right now, I've got a student who's finishing up a PhD in astrophysics at Cornell. Andrew Schrader is in this first or second year of a PhD program in general relativity at Ole Miss. Um, we've had students go to David Ditzwicki, went to Syracuse, wound up doing work in physics that way. But then there's like Jacob Podkaminer, who did a PhD in, I forget the exact title. I don't know if it was, I think it was environmental engineering, something. I forget that the exact title. That was at Wisconsin. Harris Goldman did a physics PhD and is now working in quantum information. He did his PhD at Riverside. Um, I don't have a breakdown in terms of percentages. What I would say is that I think we have a good track record of students winding up in the places that they want to wind up. We had one student who did a PhD, I think it was in New Hampshire, but she wasn't interested in a high-powered research career, and she's got a teaching job that has sort of low research expectations. But that's, again, that's what, that was what she wanted. Um, so I can't give you percentages, but what I can say is that the students have wound up in some very good places, um, and doing really. In fact, my student who's finishing up at Cornell right now, in astrophysics, he's always texting me and updating me on what he's working on. So his latest paper is very cool. How do we apply and when do we get to apply for this? So you just come to HWS. You make yourself known. Make sure your first year advisor knows you want to do 3-2. And you would also during the fall semester, there's typically, I'll hold some information session. So you'll get on that email list. But again, you want to make sure that you're taking physics and calculus to start with. Again, if you've got some advanced placement or something, we work around that. And then you don't actually apply to Dartmouth. You apply like January-ish. It's December, January of your sophomore year. Columbia, you apply January-ish of your junior year after you've had a chance to decide that that's what you want to do. And again, you're not locked in. Even if you get in, you're not locked in till you actually go. It's really been a wide range of students in different arenas. I can remember one, he was actually CS major, went to Penn. So I can think of Penn, I can think of Cornell, Boulder, I think 2 at Boulder, Wisconsin, I think at JIT, Buffalo. I'm trying to think. Actually, I think Adam Gutenplan did aerospace at MIT, but that was like 15 years ago. So I'm digging up memory there. Other questions? I'm trying to make sure I didn't miss anything in the chat too. Oh, somebody asked, are there any optics classes? So at the moment, we don't have a class that's optics, qua optics. Optics is covered, for instance, in Intro Physics 2, and if also you're taking advanced E&M. Optics, electricity magnetism is the field that incorporates optics. But we also have, if you look at the research students are doing, and in particular, the ones who are doing the remote sensing work with Professor Dimitriou, studying algae blooms and so forth with drones. We also have a research festival that goes out on the lake, but the drones are able to study the lake much more efficiently. And so that research is entirely optics driven. In fact, Chris Demas, who's now a medical resident, in pediatrics, but he was a double major in physics and chemistry, and his honors project was optics based on spectroscopic studies of Seneca Lake. So there are ways that we can do that, and it's also possible. We have in the past had a direct optics class, or something that has kind of we had for a while. We focused on other things now. For instance, I teach a class on quantum information, a lot of people, and quantum computing. So a lot of people who are currently in what's called AMO physics, atomic, molecular, and optical physics, quantum computing is driving a lot of that. And so that's a class we have that you will not find at most institutions. And somebody said, talking about being undecided and having those large questions. Yeah. And HWS is a great place when you're not sure where to go from the large range of things to help figure that out. And I would say someone who's really, unsure of what direction might decide, look, I'm going to spend my 4 years at HWS. Maybe I do, you know, physics and environmental studies. Maybe I do environmental studies in a philosophy major focusing on ethics or something like that, right? We had our student Josh Andrews, we've had a couple of students go to law school from, not from engineering, but from physics. And I think one of the beauties of HWS is that students find what they want to do, and we help make sure that happens. We don't try to steer them into paths that are convenient for us. I've had two great cases of that. One, a student who came in, knew she wanted to do medical school, but knew she didn't want to major in biochemistry, and I worked with her she designed her own major. And just did a lot. I remember colleagues saying, you know, it's so many other places she would have told, look, you know, you want to be a doctor, just major in biochem and be done with it. It's like, no, she had these other things because of that she wanted to explore, which is why she wanted to become a doctor. I also had a student, physics major. We started in an honors project, took a class his senior year outside physics. He said, I think this is what I want to do. And we had this whole conversation. And I said to him, look, you got to figure that out because you can't be living life saying, what if, what if, what if? I said, so spring of your senior year, explore that other field. If you want to go on to physics grad school, your record's great. You'll get in. But if you decide that's the thing for you, then you'll know. And he did. And that's the direction he went. And so we really want to make sure that students find that they go in the direction that works for them. And they really do figure it out. My colleague Ted Allen says, who's taught a bunch of places, he said he thinks HWS is the place where he sees the greatest transformation from who students are when they enter and who they are when they leave. And I don't think as a, you know, as an institution of higher learning, I don't think you could ask for anything more than that. If you have further questions, feel free to reach out. And should you wind up coming to HWS and engineering is a thing you want to explore, make sure you reach out to me, make sure you're on the right path. Whether that's once the student picks an advisor major, do they get advisor field? Yes, absolutely. Your first year seminar instructor is your advisor until you declare a major. When you declare a major, your advisor is somebody in that new department. In practice, students start making, even before they officially declare the major, they start glomming on to that new advisor and are getting advice at that point. And no need to apologize for that last question. Happy to have answered it. Well, I hope I didn't see a lot of faces here, but I saw a lot of names. So hopefully I'll recognize some of those names in the fall. HWS, this is just engineering, but I would say, you know, the reason I've been at HWS for 30 years is that I like what we do here. I've turned down other jobs in order to stay here. And I think it's just a really, really wonderful place. Engineering is just one piece of that whole puzzle. So thank you all.